Hello, everybody, and welcome to your weekly news recap. We are your hosts, Jacob Smith,
And Matt Morgans.
here to break down some of the biggest and most interesting stories of the week in the gaming industry. As usual, we're always looking to answer audience questions and implement audience feedback, so if you have any of either, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. First off this week, a pretty big acquisition in the world of gaming. Epic Games, the recent upsurge and competitor to Valve, has acquired Psyonix, the studio behind Rocket League. This is indeed a power play on Epic's part. Matt, what do you make of this?
It's definitely a strong move, especially coming from the offer that was made last week by Tim Sweeney, kind of telling Steam that Epic was willing to back off of doing these kind of aggressive exclusive deals if Steam would match their revenue share of 12%. But going after Rocket League is a big move against Steam, because Rocket League's been a major game for Steam and their platform for a long time.
For a while now, yeah.
And this isn't just, them acquiring the studio, this is them acquiring the game itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you have some more details on exactly what this means for Rocket League on Steam.
Yeah, so far, luckily the game still will be currently supported on Steam. Time will tell if that is going to continue to be the case as the years go on. But for now, there's no sign that Epic plans to take away that purchase for people who have already made it and been playing on Steam for a while now, since the game's release. It's also been strongly hinted at that it will be unavailable for purchase on Steam in the future. The timeline on that is indefinite, but we do know that it will be fully supported by DLC updates on Steam, which I think is a really smart move.
Okay. So it does mean at least that the existing audience of Rocket League is still going to be supported, which I think the game has already been review bombed, which is not entirely surprising. We've certainly spoken at length before about the whole issue with user reviews and review bombing. But in this case, we're going to see an instance where a game, which I'm not sure if this has happened exactly like this before, where a game that's existed for a long time is just removed from a platform and put on someone else's platform.
If it does happen, it's rare.
Yeah, this has mainly happened for Epic in terms of upcoming games. They announce exclusive deals, and the game won't come to Steam for a year or 6 months. In this case, this is a game that's been around for years, and it's not going to be available for new players. So it does mean Epic sort of having to build an infrastructure, an ecosystem of gamers on their own platform. To kind of build up Rocket League. But
I think
given Rocket League's presence in streaming for sure, there's a lot of people who are probably looking to get into it who might be lured across now that it's only available on the Epic Games Store.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what Epic are trying to do, right? Build that concurrent user base, really build it up, and make their games all the more enticing for people to keep coming back to. And I think a game like Rocket League is the perfect way to do that.
Absolutely. I think it also maybe suggests that they're starting to branch out and kind of not rely solely on Fortnite, because until now, Fortnite's really been the basis of their revenue model.
It's been their bread and butter.
Exactly.
their whole kind of run.
But it's a game that is slowly in decline, and as natural for any game after this amount of time. And despite their best efforts, it is eventually going to fade. So they need to invest in other things, and whether that's working on development for other games that they haven't yet announced, we don't know if they have anything like that in the works, or acquiring these kind of big esports and streaming titles like Rocket League, and bringing them over exclusively to their platform.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a good deal for Psyonix in terms of their resources. They now have an exponentially larger amount of resources than they did to work with before. So who knows? We might see some really cool changes come to Rocket League as a direct result of this. Clearly, Epic is looking for growth. They're not looking to stifle their developers. I mean, that would be pretty contradictory to their whole plan with this growth. So we'll see. We'll see what the future holds for Epic and Rocket League. As for now, like you mentioned, the game has been review bombed on Steam, to no surprise. We like you said, we've spoken at length about this on the podcast before, and this is kind of no different. But as of right now, Rocket League is still available for purchase on Steam. So if you're still looking to play on your favorite platform, get it while it's hot. Conversely, Valve has been up to a little shenanigans of their own. If you haven't heard, Valve took a big leap in VR technology with the Valve Index, which they recently announced. I've got some details regarding that as far as the price and all that. It's priced pretty high up there. It's $1,000 for the base unit.
Not cheap.
No, at $500 if you're upgrading from the HTC Vive, but it boasts some pretty cool features. It boasts an interesting, innovative controller that can actually be worn instead of simply held. Straps kind of reminiscent of the Wii era, strapped directly to your hands and make the controller kind of more an extension of you. And I think that's another step into making VR more immersive. And it's got higher resolution per eye. They haven't released specific specs, but it's looking to blow Oculus out of the water. What do you make of this move from Valve?
It's an interesting move, and I'd like to know really how much of Valve's resources are going into this. Whether this is just the kind of the result of a single branch of their company, or whether this is really what they're choosing to focus on. Because if we've been waiting for months really for Valve to come out with any kind of response to the Epic Games Store kind of coming after them significantly with exclusive deals, and certainly this latest acquisition of Psyonix is a big blow against them. And we haven't seen Valve come out and say or do anything. And now they've come out and announced this new kind of high-end VR headset, which is great, but it just doesn't seem like it's going to be catering to the audience, and I don't think it's necessarily what the majority of Steam users who want to see Steam kind of more actively competing with Epic, I don't think it's really what they want to see. Yeah. It's a worthwhile goal, I think, to drive VR technology, but VR is still a very niche genre, and it's something that most gamers don't have access to. And certainly this latest headset with a $1,000 price tag, that's going to be an even smaller market that they're potentially dealing with.
And we know that the pre-orders have sold out, but again, we don't know how many units they were working with to begin with. So we don't really know. It's an indicator that there is interest, but we don't know how big of a scale that interest represents.
Yes, certainly I would be very skeptical of any claims that it's some sort of huge run for stock. We were discussing prior to recording the amount of people who have $1,000 on hand to make an impulse pre-order is not high.
No.
And in all likelihood it was more along the lines of people, there's probably more people who already have an HTC Vive who are opting for the lower price bracket of $500 to upgrade. I would not assume that this is even close to a majority of Steam users. I'd be impressed if this was even 5% of Steam's users. To be honest, I'd be impressed if even 5% of Steam's users had access to VR at all, let alone this new tech. So it begs the question, like, where Valve is looking to kind of compete. And this kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning. Are they looking to compete with Epic on the same playing field, or are they looking to invest further and further into VR as a way to kind of transition their platform into something else, which Epic isn't necessarily competing with them for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, only time will tell what Valve's been up to. We know they have no interest in making games. The acquisition of Campo Santo sometime last year is interesting, but clearly this is where their major efforts are focused. So we'll see. Yeah. We'll see if this is really enough to keep up with what Epic is doing. But in regards to some bigger news, because, what can get bigger than Valve? It's Borderlands. Of course it is. And I know you got a lot of information regarding Borderlands 3, so let's just jump right into it.
Yes, as per the last few weeks, Gearbox has not been shy on releasing new information about Borderlands 3. So over the weekend we had the gameplay reveal live stream, so they showed off about an hour of Borderlands 3 gameplay footage, and that that now kind of transitions to a period where we're going to see a lot of streamers streaming Borderlands 3, because the studio's provided a lot of well-known streamers and influencers with some kind of version of the game. It looks like what they're providing it's obviously not the full game, because we're still months away from release, but it seems to be some sort of demo pack or something along that sort of lines. Something to kind of show players a bit about what they're going to get when the game comes out in September.
Yeah, from what I understand, no one's been getting multiplayer demos. It's all single-player experiences of a part of the main campaign, the main story.
Certainly that's not surprising, because in all likelihood they haven't opened the multiplayer servers yet.
No.
So it probably isn't even possible to play multiplayer outside of Gearbox's own studio. In terms of the game length, we've got some details there. Obviously, game length's always a bit of a varying topic. It obviously does depend on the player and what they choose to do. But according to Gearbox, the core story of Borderlands 3 should take most players about 30 hours to complete. So it's going to be it's not going to be something you can just breeze through. And that's also assuming that you really kind of beeline through the story and you don't take time to do all of the side stuff. And comparing this to Borderlands 2, Borderlands 2's sort of average story playthrough completion is about 30 hours. So it looks like the core story is going to be about the same length. But including all of the side stuff, Borderlands 2, it can easily go over 100 hours. Especially when we get into the realm of DLC content that was added post-launch.
Of which there was plenty.
Yes, exactly. So, while we don't have specific details on this, at the moment it's looking like, in terms of side content, Borderlands 3 is going to be even larger than Borderlands 2.
Nice, and I can't imagine any Borderlands fan wants to just speed straight through it, go linear.
No.
There might be a few out there, but certainly the majority are going to take more than 30 hours.
Certainly.
Which is a fun prospect. So.
Yes. So we did get a new trailer at the end of the reveal live stream, and that kind of really highlighted the scope and scale of the game. They showed off a whole load of different settings that are going to appear in the game and that sort of thing. We got to see a gun that catches on fire and you have to put it out with a water pistol. That kind of typical Borderlands kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, I heard about that. I actually thought it was a joke at first, and then
I mean, you could say that about a lot of stuff that's in Borderlands.
Yeah, fair enough.
So yeah, we're getting a lot more details. We're undoubtedly going to hear a bit more about the characters and whatnot in the coming weeks, and especially as we kind of head into E3. The kind of two main stories that we got out of Borderlands news in the last week kind of resolved a couple of smaller controversies about the game. And the first of those is about the voice casting for Rhys. Rhys was one of the main characters of Tales from the Borderlands, and was kind of famously voiced by Troy Baker, the very well-known voice actor.
Of course.
And when the first trailers for Borderlands 3 came out, people spotted that Rhys was in the game. And so Troy Baker was asked whether he would be reprising the role, and he came out and said he'd love to reprise the role, but Gearbox hadn't approached him to do that.
Yikes.
And that on its own, that's far from being a controversy. What made it convoluted after that was that Randy Pitchford went on Twitter and said that he'd been told by the audio director that Baker had turned the role down, and that's where things got confusing.
Getting a little hairy now.
Yeah. We never really got a resolution as to what the actual truth of the matter was, but it certainly seems like Baker did not turn any kind of role down. He came out and denied those statements, said he had never been contacted by Gearbox about it. So it seems like maybe there was just some internal miscommunication at Gearbox.
That's a shame. That is it.
Yeah.
That's pretty disheartening.
We do now have a resolution to the story, which is that we do now know who is actually voicing the character of Rhys, because he went out on Twitter and said, I'm going to be voicing the character. And that is a voice actor called Ray Chase, who I wouldn't say that he's as well known as Troy Baker, but he is certainly a well-known voice actor.
Yeah.
He voiced Noctis in Final Fantasy 15, and that's really the role he's best known for.
Mm-hmm.
And in his tweet, kind of announcing that he was going to be the voice actor for the role, he cited Troy Baker's performance in Tales from the Borderlands as a big inspiration, and he was very sort of, supportive of the other voice actor. So
nice.
Hopefully that'll kind of resolve things for fans. It also kind of suggests that assumptions about the role might have been off, because when Pitchford first came out and said that Troy Baker wouldn't be reprising the role, he said that he didn't think it would matter,
Mm-hmm.
and the assumption was that it wouldn't matter because maybe that this was just like a cameo role, or he really wasn't a major character in the story, and so it didn't really matter if it was the same voice actor. But the announcement that it's going to be Ray Chase, who's a pretty well-known voice actor, actually suggests that he might be playing a much larger role in the game.
Yeah.
And we've got some more screenshots of him appearing either in person or as a hologram. So it looks like him, it's certainly in his role as the kind of head of the Atlas Corporation, which is a big factor in the Borderlands story,
Mm-hmm.
is going to be a big thing in the Borderlands 3 story. So that's definitely going to be an interesting one to watch out for when the game comes out.
Yeah. I think...
And perhaps as well when we get some kind of story trailer, because so far they haven't released any kind of story or character trailer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think once we get more details on that, it'll become, obviously more clear as to what Reese's role will be. But I definitely found it hard pressed to believe that he didn't have a big role, considering, like you said, Atlas's huge role in the Borderlands world and
yeah,
lore.
Exactly.
Certainly
going from. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that I know we've got even more details regarding Borderlands, because this has just been such a big dump of info this week.
Yeah, the other kind of more controversial point was the question of microtransactions. So obviously, a game like Borderlands 3 coming out in an environment like the gaming market is at the moment, the assumption is that it's going to have microtransactions.
Mm-hmm.
So
especially being published by 2K, I think that was kind of the general
exactly.
assumption.
So obviously, with all the announcements, players wanted to know, are there going to be microtransactions? And until the gameplay reveal stream, they had not talked about microtransactions.
Mm-hmm.
And during that stream, which it was a live event, Randy Pitchford went on stage, and during the course of the event he said there would be no microtransactions, and he also said there would be no microtransaction-y free-to-play junk, which admittedly is a bit ambiguous. And
that's quite not the most official term.
Yes, and it turns out that he may have partially misspoke.
Oh no.
Because almost at the same time as him saying that, the game's creative director was doing an interview with Game Informer and said that there'd be cosmetic microtransactions. So that prompted a lot of confusion on social media, and also prompted Pitchford to then attack Game Informer for having a misleading headline and basically say that when he said there'd be no microtransactions, what he meant was there would be no premium currency or loot boxes or any kind of pay-to-win mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
But then a lot of people on Twitter pointed out that cosmetic microtransactions are still microtransactions.
Yeah.
So certainly what he said on stage was a bit misleading, but it was also a live event, and people do make mistakes when they're talking off the cuff, so...
I think it's easy to understand. It's not like he was coming forward with a pre-rehearsed press release. This
certainly.
Is, I think it's easy to understand.
Yeah, and to clarify the whole situation, Eurogamer ended up contacting 2K, and then they released a statement that kind of just confirmed things, that Borderlands 3 is going to have microtransactions, but they are going to be purely cosmetic. There's not going to be any pay-to-win. You're not going to be able to buy guns or anything like that. It's just going to be cosmetic skins and things of that sort. And also, while we don't have this confirmation from 2K, this actually came from Pitchford in a follow-up tweet, but it was a bit more cogent, so I think it's worth taking as written. He said that those same kind of cosmetic items would also show up in in-game loot to some extent. So it looks like you will still be able to get some of those items, or maybe all of them, without having to actually pay microtransactions.
It's got this. Luckily, this whole situation has a nice little bow wrap around it, but it was certainly a whirlwind roller coaster of emotions there amid several different announcements.
A lot of very dedicated Borderlands fans taking umbrage at the suggestion that there would be microtransactions in Borderlands 3, which it's not entirely surprising to see microtransactions. If anything, it would be surprising if there weren't.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think people will be satisfied with the fact that it's purely cosmetic. I don't think anyone's going to be really upset about that. I mean, we've seen a lot of games recently kind of moving down that path of only doing cosmetic microtransactions.
Yeah.
And people seem to be accepting that this is a better compromise than having pay-to-win mechanics. You know, nobody wants anything pay-to-win, but if it's purely cosmetic and it's purely optional and the game isn't being set up to kind of force people to grind to incentivize microtransactions, then I don't think there's really much to take offense over.
No, and
hopefully this will kind of quiet things down.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to how it all shakes out in the final game. I think we all are, but this is so far a resolution that we all can respectfully accept. I think it's the best thing we could have hoped for. Kind of jumping into more Elder Scrolls news, because I know that game is only expanding as time goes on. I know you've got something surrounding the Necromancer week. Tell me more about that.
So ZeniMax, who make Elder Scrolls Online, they've announced that this week is going to be what they're calling Necromancer week. So by the time when this releases, it will be last week. But recording today, we're at the end of Necromancer week. And what Necromancer Week seems to be an opportunity for them to kind of give a big info dump about the new upcoming Necromancer class, which is a feature in the Elsewhere Chapter DLC, which is coming, I think, on the 4th of June.
Okay.
So we're getting close now to release. I think we're about a month away from release. Obviously, there's a ton coming in Elsewhere. It's their third big chapter DLC, following on from Morrowind and Somerset. And one of the things that's coming in this is this new Necromancer class, which is not specifically something to do with the region of Elsewhere, but it is something that's coming to the game and will be playable for people to use as a new class.
Well, it's been long awaited by fans since its release.
Yeah, certainly. People have wanted to see a Necromancer class, like a dedicated Necromancer class, for a long time. And it's now finally coming to the game as a dedicated class. But up till now, we really haven't heard a lot about how it's going to work in-game. ZeniMax has more been focused on the region of Elsewhere and the kind of cultural and character stuff that's coming. And obviously, of course, the dragons that are coming for the first time in the game. But with this week, they released a new trailer for the class at the start of the week, and then 2 days later they released a deep dive into the class's mechanics, which was a sort of 6.5-minute video interviewing developers about how the class is going to play.
Okay.
And they've also released a lot of information on their website, kind of detailing how the class is going to play, how they've divided up the skill lines, how it's going to work with necromancy being a crime. Certainly their justice system tweaks look like it's going to be a pretty unique class to play, where a lot of your skills are criminal acts. So if you use them in front of the in-game NPCs, you can just get a bounty.
Nice. That's really interesting, though, to add that as a core mechanic, a core class in the game. Yeah,
certainly. And it's very in keeping with the lore, with necromancy being this kind of forbidden art in Tamriel. It's always been something that's been considered to be, an innately evil thing to study. And though we have seen some necromancy appear in Elder Scrolls games before, we've never seen, I think, like the severity of the criminal system. Like, sure, there's some criminal stuff you can do with necromancy in Skyrim and things like that, but it looks like this is going to really give more power to the game's law enforcement system to kind of go after necromancy, which is very interesting. And I'd be interested to see this as a model looking ahead to Elder Scrolls 6 to kind of flesh out necromancy, because it's a fascinating part of the Elder Scrolls lore, but it's something that didn't really get delved into that much with Skyrim and only a bit with Oblivion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's gonna be really interesting. I like that not only are they adding Elsewhere as this interesting location, but they're expanding on the lore of the broader Elder Scrolls. By making this, I mean, seemingly innocuous big expansion, they're doing a lot more for the world at large. I think it's gonna be really cool. It's gonna be see how those mechanics shake out.
Yeah, it's certainly good to see ZeniMax kind of really paying tribute to the lore, which they have consistently done. I mean, they do have a literal on-staff lore master. They definitely pay attention to their lore. I think they're very well aware that a lot of their fans are really into the Elder Scrolls lore. So bringing stuff like this, which really ties into it, is definitely going to be popular.
I'm looking forward to seeing what they're going to do, because knowing them, it's going to be big and it's going to be fun. And kind of tie things together this week, I know you've got some news about what's going on with Total War 3 Kingdoms. Highly anticipated, long awaited.
Yep, absolutely. You can find a link to this in the video description, but the final second half of the interviews that I did with Creative Assembly are now all out on VGR. The first two were about the DLC, which came out a few weeks ago, and the third interview, which was so long it had to be divided into two parts, is specifically about Three Kingdoms and about the design and character systems and things like that. So if you want more information about that, absolutely check out that link and that interview. But this week has been really interesting to kind of see Creative Assembly get back into the swing of marketing Three Kingdoms, because their Warhammer 2 DLC is out now. They can really focus on the upcoming release date, which is in a few weeks' time.
Exciting.
And to do that, they've released a new kind of showcase video. They're focusing on the mid-game of the campaign, which we haven't really seen too much of. I mean, they've been live streaming the game a lot since even just a few months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been doing these kind of consistent 2-hour, 3-part live streams over the course of 3 weeks. So we've been able to see a campaign really develop, but they've always ended it after 3 weeks. So we've never seen beyond the sort of 6-hour mark of the campaign. And so this latest video just kind of showcases what the game gets to be like after around turn 100.
Okay. And
what we see in it is actually the development of the namesake Three Kingdoms.
Mm-hmm.
Once you reach the rank of king in the game, which their campaign that they use as an example, this happened around turn 102, 103.
Okay.
And at that point, the game basically took the 3 largest factions in the world and turned them into the Three Kingdoms. And it's not necessarily going to be the canonical Three Kingdoms. In their instance, 2 of the kingdoms were actually fairly canonical, but
mm-hmm.
that's really more down to chance than anything else.
Okay. Makes sense.
And then at that point in the game, the player will be, rather than sort of scrapping amongst numerous factions, it's going to become more about, significant warfare and competition between 3 individual kingdoms. And that's definitely going to be a real kind of shake-up to the campaign format at that point in the game. And there's definitely some interesting kind of addendums to it as well. We found out that instance of Three Kingdoms developing can actually happen prompted by the AI, not just players. So if another faction reaches the rank of king, they can trigger the transition into the Three Kingdoms without the players actually having any input. So the player could suddenly find themselves as one of the Three Kingdoms, or they could even find themselves as a small part of one of the Three Kingdoms because they weren't one of the 3 big factions, and then having to kind of usurp power from somebody in one of these kingdoms.
I love the power dynamic. I think adding that into core mechanic into the game is so interesting, not just freely handing the players the opportunity to be king or to be one of the 3 kingdoms.
Yeah, absolutely.
To think that they'll actually have to work for it and could potentially end up on as an underling is really interesting. I think that's not something I've really seen before.
Certainly. I think their kind of diplomacy and intrigue system is going to be the most kind of developed that they've ever had in a Total War game. And it does look very, very interesting.
That's awesome. And I know your interviews got a lot of in-depth info with Creative Assembly, so everyone should absolutely go check that out. Who's looking for more info on Three Kingdoms, because it's sure to be a big release in a couple weeks when it hits.
Indeed.
But that's gonna wrap it up for us this week. Thank you so much for tuning in today. You can find these stories and more at VGR.com, as well as in the description below. We are constantly looking for ways to improve the podcast, so as usual, if you have any feedback or ways you think we could implement any positive changes to the show, please feel free to let us know, again, in the comments below. Once again, I'm Jacob Smith.
I'm Matt Morgans.
And we will see you next week.